I'd like to welcome you all to the May 2nd, 2023 public session of the Audit Committee and call this meeting to order. First item on our agenda is the acknowledgement of traditional lands, and today Trustee Rocha will be reading that.
Halton, as we know it today, is rich in history and modern traditions of many First Nations and the Métis. From the Anishinaabe to the Attawandaron, the Haudenosaunee, and the Métis, these lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in Indigenous history. As we gather today on these treaty lands, we have the responsibility to honor and respect the four directions, land, waters, plants, animals, ancestors that walked before us, and all the wonderful elements of creation that exist. We would like to acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for sharing their traditional territory with us.
Thank you for that, Trustee Rocha. At this point, it's my privilege to announce that we have appointed Patricia Gonzalez as the new external member on our Audit Committee effective April 21, 2023 and ending December 31, 2026. Patricia is a CPA with 30 years of experience in auditing and professional services, applying and interpreting accounting standards for a variety of organizations. Patricia is a quality assurance partner with BDO and has previous experience as principal in auditing and assurance standards development with CPA Canada. In addition to her financial expertise, Patricia held the role of Chief Inclusion and Diversity Officer with BDO and is a champion of equity and inclusion in the workplace. Please join me in welcoming Patricia to our Audit Committee. Now I'd like to ask for any declarations of possible conflict of interest. Seeing none, we will move on to approval of the agenda. Could I have someone please move for the agenda to be approved? Sana, seconded by Donna. Is there any discussion regarding the agenda? Seeing none, that is unanimously approved. Moving on to the ratification action items. We have the minutes from our meeting on February 14th, 2023. Could I please have someone move for the acceptance of the minutes? Sana, and seconded by Donna. Is there any discussion regarding the minutes? Seeing none, those are approved by unanimous consent. The next item on ratification is approval of business transacted in private session, and we have no motions from private session today to approve. We do have action items for public session, and so I call you to attention page 7, item 2.3.1, external audit plan for 2022-2023 financial statement audit. Lillian Chung from Deloitte.
Thank you, and thank you to the Audit Committee for having us here today. My name is Lillian Chung. I'm a partner from Deloitte and have been working with the Halton District School Board for a good number of years now. I'm joined by Anthony Delavedova, who is our audit manager, and between the two of us, we'll walk you through very quickly our audit plan, which is included in your agenda package for today. We will assume that the materials have been read, so our intention is to cover some of the key highlights outlined in our audit plan this year, and then happy to take any questions that you may have for us. I'm going to start on the executive summary page, which is page 10 in your package. A recap to the audit committee. We are engaged to perform an audit of the financial statements of the school board for the August 31st, 2023 year end. The school board does, in line with other school boards in the province, follow a special purpose framework that's set out by the Ministry of Education, which is in line with prior years as well. As I go through the audit plan for this year, you'll note that there are some accounting changes which are upcoming for this year, which we have been working with management to ensure that they are properly reflected in the 2023 financial statements. A reminder to the audit committee that in addition to the audit of the financial statements, we also perform an agreed upon procedures engagement on the March 31st, 2023 EFIS reporting that is required for the Ministry of Education. And I'll speak a little bit later on as well about some of the changes to those procedures in the current year in particular. As outlined in our executive summary, we have identified for you 6 areas of audit risks this year. By and large, these audit risk areas are consistent with prior year's audits. But as I've mentioned before, there are some accounting changes that are coming this year, which is identified as our audit risk number 6. I'll speak to that a little bit later on. But I don't propose to go through items 1 to 5 in any great detail. They are in line with prior years, so that is no different than in the past and is consistent. In terms of overall audit materiality, so on an annual basis, we do confirm to the committee the overall audit materiality that we use to guide the extent of our audit testing, but also to assist us with assessing the overall fair presentation of the financial statements. And we intend to set that at 3% of expenses. So this is in line with prior years as well. And we will be reporting back to the committee on any misstatements greater than 5% of that materiality number. Just to give the committee an idea, last year, that clearly trivial threshold over which we report any misstatements to you was $1 million. So that will give you an indication of the amount that we're expecting to be roughly for the current year. Moving on to the next page, just a couple of items that I do want to raise for the committee's information. I do want to raise the fact that, as with prior years, this is a group audit for us, and what that means is that the financial statements of the school board do contain their proportionate share of the activities of Halton Student Transportation Services, and we do communicate with KPMG, who is the auditors of Halton Student Transportation Services, as it relates to our consolidated audit, and that is not changing from prior years. And then just lastly, on this page, we do make use of our IT specialists to help us with testing IT general controls. That will continue into this year as well. And so we will be reporting back to you on the outcome of that work as part of our overall reporting on the audit results. Moving on, I do just want to speak briefly about the audit risks for this year. As I've mentioned before, the first 5 for this year, and that's on page 12 of the agenda package, are consistent with prior years. Revenue recognition as well as management override of controls. As you may recall, in prior years, they are always the 2 audit risk areas which are identified as significant audit risks. These are required under Canadian auditing standards. For revenue recognition, that's because for most entities, revenue is one of those balances that's most scrutinized in the financial statements. We do take a very school board specific approach to assessing and testing revenue, which we've outlined here in our proposed audit response. So we do intend to carry that out as with prior years. For management override of internal controls, as we've mentioned in prior years as well, again, another area of presumed risk of fraud for a school board and for any other entity, because management is in a unique position. They design and implement your internal controls, and they also often have that ability to override them. So regardless of whether or not there's a history of override, we always perform additional procedures specifically relating to these areas, and we've outlined them here as well. So the areas that we typically focus on are manual journal entries, significant unusual transactions, as well as management judgments and estimates. So those are the 3 areas that we'll pay particular attention to. A note to the committee that we do not perform a control reliance. We do not take a control reliance approach to this audit. So we do perform design and implementation testing on internal controls, but we do not rely on internal controls as part of our audit. It's a largely substantive audit. So just for the committee's awareness. Moving on to the next page, we've identified 3 other areas which are consistent with prior years. I do want to speak about school-generated funds and school council funds to ensure the committee is aware that on an annual basis, we do perform school visits as part of our audit strategy. So on an annual basis, we perform a rotating set of visits to 3 elementary and 3 secondary schools as part of our testing to ensure that we're testing a sample of transactions relating to school-generated and school council funds, but also that we're testing internal controls at the school level. We also, if you'll recall, performed additional procedures relating to P cards, which we do every single year at the school level. So last year, we performed some additional procedures relating to departmental P cards, which we're not expecting to re-perform this year, but the school level P card procedures will continue. And then just one last area that I do want to speak to, which is on page 14, relates to the adoption of new PSAS accounting standards. So There are two particular accounting standards that are going to be in effect for fiscal 2023, and that is asset retirement obligations, PS 3280, as well as the financial instrument standard. Of the two standards, the asset retirement obligation standard is the one that has had the most attention across the sector, because for school boards, obviously as public sector entities with a large portfolio of capital assets, this is one where there has been a lot of concern as to whether or not obligations will arise. The ministry has done a lot of work to develop a model that the school board sector has been deploying by and large to help estimate their obligations as it relates to asset retirement obligations. So part of our audit testing will be to assess the usage of that model, the assumptions that are used within that model, as well as the inputs that are inputted by the school board in the usage of this model. And just for the committee's information, as I've mentioned before, we are now in the field performing our March 31st agreed upon procedures, and that includes a large number of procedures in the current year specifically relating to the first time adoption of this particular accounting standard. So we're actively doing that work right now, and we have been in discussion with management to ensure that we are running through scenarios of any assumptions that are being used. So that work will continue into the fiscal year end and into our year-end audit. And then at the last few sections of our audit plan, we've included a number of appendices, really more so for the committee's information on our audit approach, as well as changes to accounting standards, and also our audit timeline and a number of resources that are available to you. But maybe I'll pause. Happy to take any questions that you may have for us.
Are there any questions for Lillian at this time? Patricia.
I guess we can question. So just a couple questions. On page 11, well, I guess page 2 of your plan, 11 to 34 of the package, it talks about the use of work of specialists. So I guess my question was about the post-employment benefits. You use your own actuary as well. And then also for the ARO work, I noticed that there was a comment about using internal advisors. So I didn't know if that was also considered your auditor's expert.
Yeah.
I'm curious as to what you're doing.
Sure. So as it relates to actuarial specialists, so we do use our internal specialists to help us test the assumptions that are used in the actuarial evaluations. So that is an ongoing procedure that we perform every single year. So we expect to continue to do that this year. As it relates to ARO, so the one item that I mentioned is that the ministry developed a model, and the model contains many assumptions, much of it relating to unit costing for the remediation of certain contaminants. We are using some of our specialists who have done work in ARO internally to help us with assessing the reasonableness of that model. It's obviously a sector-wide issue, so it's early days, but we've started that work.
Long before I become committee. But I just had a question about some of the other items. So one of them is Bill 124.
Mm-hmm.
I was maybe expecting to see a risk related business of any liability, but perhaps by the time August comes around, we'll know more about that. So that might be why that was.
Yeah. And Bill 124 is a hot topic in the sector. So obviously there's been a lot of back and forth, and not just within Deloitte, but amongst all of the firms about liabilities. So for sure, it is something that we do expect that by year end, hopefully there's either a resolution so that it's no longer an uncertainty or a contingency. But that is captured kind of by our overall risk relating to estimates, because we do expect that there's a certain, at least at this point in time, a certain element of estimation relating to Bill 124.
And then the other one was just related to some of the items that came out of the value for money report relating to, you mentioned transportation, and also there's the insurance piece as well. So I just wondered if you could talk to those two items as it relates to your audit.
Sure. So for transportation, one of the items that was raised in the value for money report, which I think we discussed maybe last fiscal year, in particular response to the Auditor General's report, was whether or not the Transportation Consortium met the definition of a government partnership. So that is something that we, at the time, based on our discussion, the Auditor General's comment was that there should be more disclosure. And I think one of the things that we will revisit is whether or not there should, in fact, be more disclosure. As I've mentioned, relating to the Transportation Consortium, we do work in conjunction with KPMG as the component auditor. So I think that is something that we can continue to revisit to see whether or not there's additional disclosure required under PSAS. And then as it relates specifically to OSB, so the OSB issue has been an ongoing discussion. So we do know that at this point it is somewhat parked, but we do know that the Auditor General's office, as well as the ministry, continues to work with OSB to see whether or not they're able to obtain the information in order for the purpose of consolidation. That was something that we continued to discuss last year and in post. So that is something that I think we're staying on the pulse of as a sector. So, and I discuss very frequently with the ministry, and I think that's one of the things that we'll have to continue to monitor at this point. Yeah, exactly.
I had a question on page 8 of your report, 17 and 34. There's just AI is a hot topic. So I noticed that there's a tool on here that you referenced to using as part of the audit. And I was just, obviously with some of the more large language tools, the issues around data privacy
Yeah.
and, is it a closed tool that's being used? So I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about how this is being used.
Sure.
And just the exposure of the data to
Sure.
the outside world.
Yeah, so our AI tool is Argus. So by and large, that tool is great for reviews of contracts. We don't actually expect to deploy this on the school board's audit. So the one analytic tool that we will use is Excel Analytics as well as Spotlight. So those are two tools that we use for data interrogation. They're closed. It's completely closed. The data set is just whatever we put in it, and it's stored local. So it's not something that I think would be exposed.
And the last question I have, I was asking management earlier if you had any discussions with management about the application of the new ISO rules that came into effect in 2023.
Yeah.
And whether that was going to impact the way you provide some of the services, especially for the advice that's given throughout the year, not at the time of the audit.
Yeah.
I know there's been some changes that firms had to make when delivering services and making sure that we're not crossing the incentives.
Yeah. Yeah, so not yet. We haven't had that discussion, but it will certainly be on our list of items to discuss. From Deloitte's perspective, we're in the midst of actually having discussions with our audit partner to educate them on the ISO rules and the changes that are in place. So we're certainly aware of it. I would say that from an independence perspective, I do expect that in the next year or so, as we continue to adopt and deploy across our practice, that there will be more discussions. Here in particular, we don't actually do very much non-audit work at all. So I think that's not something that, as it stands right now, we're overly concerned with because we do have really strong safeguards as it relates to any provision of non-audit work here.
Yeah, it's kind of more even the like when you're
Yeah.
implementing new standards and things like that.
Yeah.
Because if there's other sort of people that have to be put in place in that
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
That's kind of where the angle is coming at. It's just to make sure management is aware if there's any of those.
Yep.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, we need a motion to receive this report and recommend it to the Board of Trustees. Who would be interested in making that motion? Tanya, seconded by Patricia. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 2.3.2 on page 24 of the agenda package. And I'll ask Andrea to speak to the Regional Internal Audit Plan for 2022, 2023, 2024. Too many 20s.
Thank you very much. Okay, so this is a follow-on to the report that we brought in February, and just for Patricia's benefit, this board has adopted a risk assessment process that they complete every year, and then we use that to help base our audit plan off of. I would say that definitely out of the 10 boards at the West of Central, they're a leader in that aspect, so for your knowledge. And one of the things that they did was back in 2021, 22, identified the top 4 risks for the organization, and we, as Regional Internal Audit, have been working our way through that. So we did mental health and well-being for students last year. We're doing mental health and well-being for staff this year, as well as the penetration testing. So our plan for next year is to focus on the equity and inclusion objective, as well as the new top risk that was identified for this year, which is student achievement post-pandemic. So we're putting forward the 2 audits for next year, equity and inclusion and student achievement post-pandemic. And then we will continue to work on our follow-up reviews of the outstanding items related to privacy, procurement, and student mental health. I'm open to any questions.
Are there any questions for Andrea regarding this report? Okay, I will read the motion. Be it resolved that the Audit Committee recommends that the 2023-2024 Regional Internal Audit Plan, which includes the confirmation of risk management strategic objectives, understanding stakeholder needs under the Equity and Inclusion Strategic Priority, and student achievement post-pandemic, plus a follow-up review of student mental health and any remaining action plans identified during the privacy and procurement audits be approved by the Board of Trustees. Moved by Patricia, seconded by Donna. Are there any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Thank you. That passed unanimously. Now we can move on to the next report. Did you want to discuss the open committee session for Regional Internal Audit Status Report? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the first item I want to bring to your attention is since the beginning of Regional Internal Audit, which was in 2010, so 13 years ago, the West of Central Region, again, who supports the public and Catholic boards in Waterloo, Guelph, Hamilton, Halton, and Niagara, was hosted by the Waterloo Region District School Board. And starting April 1st of this year, we're now hosted by the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board. So we moved employers, but not jobs. So we continue working with your board in the same way we always have previously, but we have a new email address to reach us at. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. We've already talked about the 23-24 audit plan proposal. And then the last thing I wanted to bring to you today was just a confirmation of our annual independence assertion that we are organizationally independent and have been allowed to carry out our responsibilities in an unbiased manner. So we do that once a year in accordance with the professional standards for internal auditing.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Andrea regarding this report? Seeing none, we will move on to the timelines for financial reporting presentation by Superintendent Ngoy.
Thank you. And the timelines are for the current fiscal year as we are approaching the end of the year, and the last quarterly financial report that will go to the board on June 21st. As those reports are available, we link them in the package for the external members of the audit committee, so you can follow along. Just as a quick background, the budget process that starts before the year, the fiscal year, is under the approval of the Board of Trustees. And then the quarterly reporting, we're linking them here because the financial statements are under the purview of the audit committee for review and recommendation to the board. We just wanted to make sure all the reports are linked so that when we compare the financial statements to the budget, you can see the progression towards the year end and what has changed throughout the year. And then we also have started the 23-24 fiscal year. We are working on the budget development. We do have tomorrow, there's a release of grants for student needs that will go to the board, and we'll link it here. And then there's a committee of the whole presentations on May 10 and 24, and with the approval of the budget in June. So as those dates pass, we will be linking those reports. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions for Superintendent McCoy? I have one question. I just wanted to know when you will be speaking with SEAC regarding their requests for today?
Tonight.
Tonight. Well, there we go. Okay, perfect. Seeing no other questions, we'll move on to the next item, which is the fraud prevention and management policy.
Thank you. And in an effort to also bring the same timelines for both the policy and procedure, we are bringing both of them to the audit committee for review and track changes. So there's minor changes provided within both of them and nothing substantial that was noted, and would be happy to take any questions before we, Amy would be presenting them over to the committee of the whole.
Tanya.
Yeah, so I was looking over the policy, and I do have a couple of questions. In the section under terminology, the second paragraph, the one that starts with a material act of fraud. After the $25,000 amount, it indicates inappropriate or suspected inappropriate activities by a trustee, officer of the board, general manager, or principal. So I'm looking for two items of clarification. Who is deemed to be an officer? And is there any reason why employees have been excluded from this description?
Excellent questions. So what this, in this terminology, it makes a distinction between a material act of fraud of being 25 or over and an immaterial act of fraud. When a material act of fraud occurs, we are required to bring it to the attention of the chair of the audit committee immediately. Depending on what it is, we may call upon a special audit committee meeting. If the fraud, however, is under $25,000, we may wait until the next audit committee meeting. However, if the fraud is committed by one of the employees or trustees, so somebody in a role of power, it doesn't matter how material it is, it's going to be triggering an immediate escalation to the chair of the audit committee or chair of the board, depending on who may be the perpetrator. So there is no dollar value to or materiality when it comes to fraud for trustees, the directors, superintendents, the general managers, and the principals, which are the administrators of the schools. So those are the positions deemed in a position of power and authority, which are an exclusion to the materiality request. Not all staff would be investigated for any amounts, but it's just at the exclusion to the how fast it gets reported to the audit committee.
Okay, I have another question. So on page 2, so thank you for that. That helps. So on side 2, the second paragraph, wait, hold on. I have a lot of chicken scratching here. I'm trying to read my notes. Okay, yeah, so second paragraph. The last sentence reads, the audit committee chair will inform the board of trustees in a future scheduled board meeting in private session. So I'm a little confused because it does refer to the previous sentence, which is the director of education will inform the AC chair of any investigation of a material act of fraud with a report provided to the audit committee at the conclusion of the investigation. So where I'm looking for clarity is what will the audit committee chair report? Is it the investigation? Is it at the conclusion of the investigation, or are they reporting both instances?
They are reporting both. So if the director of education informs the audit committee of an investigation of a material act, the audit committee chair will inform the board at the next scheduled board meeting. And then at the conclusion of the investigation, that report is included in the audit committee package, and the chair of the audit committee brings that to the board in private session at the next scheduled one as well.
Okay, one last question. So to that point, is there any way we could add some language of clarity around there? Okay. And then my next question is the fourth paragraph. It starts, the Director of Education will provide an annual report regarding the implementation of this policy. So again, for clarity, what report and how will it be provided? So does the report have a name, and who does it get presented to? Is it the Board of Trustees? Is it the Audit Committee? So I'm looking for clarity there as well. Thank you.
So we can certainly clarify the language. The Director of Education provides an annual report on the implementation of this policy and any I guess, updates in private session at the Audit Committee, so once a year.
I have a question. The second paragraph, it speaks about informing the audit chair of any investigation of a material act of fraud with a report provided to the audit committee. Is that the audit committee in public session or private session? Could we add in private session to that statement? And it seemed to me that the second sentence should have come before the first sentence. The audit committee chair will inform the board of trustees in private session and then come to the audit committee? Or is it the audit committee first and then the board of trustees?
So the first would be the chair of the audit committee. If there is a requirement to schedule a special audit committee, it would be first before the board meeting.
Okay.
So we can make those clarifications.
Thank you. Yeah, those are my only questions. Anyone else? Thank you very much for this report. Look forward to seeing it come to committee of the whole. Okay, now we move on to other business. We have public questions and answers, and I will just ask if we have any. There are no. You mean the thousands of people who are watching have no questions? Okay. Well, seeing as we have completed our agenda, I declare this meeting to be adjourned. Thank you very much for your presence at this meeting today, and have a good evening.
Have a good evening, everybody.